My recent video of Tucker Carlson's recent interview with Joe Rogan, in which he said that it was evil that the United States bombed Japan with an atomic bomb in World War II in 1945, got enough attention that I think I needed to do a follow-up video, which is what this is. Now, a lot of the people who did not like what I have to say, and to be clear, I side with Tucker Carlson. I think it was unnecessary, and I think it was evil what the United States government did to Japan in 1945. But the alternate view that you hear, the pushback, and I would say a mainstream view for most of my life, is that by taking the lives of over 100,000 Japanese, most of whom were innocent civilians, men, women, children, that we save the lives of so many more if the U.S. was going to have an invasion of Japan, and what would happen to our soldiers. Well, those are two views that are debatable. I just told you which way I leaned, and I even put this video together that contrasts the Tucker Carlson view with conservative pundit Steven Crowder, who gives the sort of mainstream view I've heard all my life that the bomb was absolutely necessary and there's no bones about it. So I'll invite you to watch with me this clip.
Well,
I love, by the way, that people on my side, I'll just admit it, on the right, have spent the last 80 years defending dropping nuclear weapons on civilians. Like, are you joking?
A claim that you'll often hear is that the Japanese, we should have never dropped these bombs, even understanding the amount of lives that were, I don't want to say saved, the amount of lives that didn't have to simply be expended.
Right.
The claim they'll make is the Japanese were going to surrender anyway, so there was no need for this. Here's the truth. No, they weren't. They weren't going to surrender. So let me lay this out for you. Again, all references are available, and I really hope that other people start following suit so that you don't just hear claims on an Instagram reel and then believe it to be true. July 26th, right, the terms of the surrender of the Japanese, they were demanded, they were written out by the United States, China, Britain at the Potsdam Declaration. Okay, that's July 26th. July 28th, the Prime Minister in Japan, Kantaro, rejected it. Wholesale. And by the way,
words.
Yes.
Basically, you're using their own words. They said, they were going to surrender. He says no.
Right.
He's the prime minister. He said, no, I don't understand whose word to take.
So people telling you this, here's what they do. They say, there were this panel of experts and this person. Yeah, sure. Okay. But the Japanese prime minister said, no.
No.
So that's kind of relevant.
Right.
That's just like prima facie evil.
Yeah.
If you can't, if we hadn't done that, then this, that, the other thing, that was actually a great savings. Like, no, it's wrong to drop nuclear weapons on people.
And we were pretty clear, and by we I mean us, China, Britain, that if the terms were not agreed to, let me read this quote here, the full application of our military power backed by our resolve will mean the inevitable and complete destruction of the Japanese armed forces and just as inevitably the utter devastation of the Japanese homeland. So this is what transpired. The idea that they were going to surrender, you'll hear that. I learned that in college. No. How do I know? Because they said no.
And if you find yourself arguing that it's a good thing to drop nuclear weapons on people, then you are evil. Like it's not a tough one, right? It's not a hard call for you. It's not a hard call for me.
So I have two thoughts. You saw the two differing views there. One being what has been the mainstream view for most of my life. I've heard all my life that we had to drop the atomic bomb because it would save so many American lives. But a thought that comes to mind, Crowder was talking about surrender. We were asking for an unconditional surrender. This is Japan you're talking about. When you're talking about honor, when we left Vietnam, we wanted to say we won and come home. Iraq, declare victory and come home. That's a thing in war. Nobody wants to say that they did all this for naught, that so many soldiers' lives were lost for nothing. So that's not hard to understand, and we'll get to the surrender part a little bit later when we see some people, what they believed, that were way closer to this situation than myself, Tucker Carlson, or Steven Crowder. But another thought that came to mind, we could compare it to another event that happened during that time, in which there was a consensus at the time that was horrible, something that we all think was horrible now, and that was the Japanese internment camps. The government, the federal government of the United States, decided that we would round up Japanese Americans, people in America of Japanese descent, and put them in camps because we were worried that they would rise up and be on the side of their home country and fight against us. There was no evidence for this. We just did it. And today, we all look back and say, boy, that was horrible. That was a stain on American history. You will find some extreme people on the right who tried to defend it. I'm on the right, by the way, but I'm a libertarian. I think that's horrible. I believe in individual liberty. Their rights were completely violated. We all agree that Japanese internment was bad. But the consensus at the time was that these people who were ethnically our enemy, Japanese, would try to harm us, would wage war against us. Often people will try to rationalize evil. The Japanese internment camps were evil, and now in 2024 we can look back and say it's evil. Tucker Carlson is saying it's 2024. I can look back at the atomic bombing of Japan and call it evil. But a lot of Americans are still saying, no, it was the right thing to do because we save lives. Well, to hell with my opinion, to hell with Tucker Carlson's opinion, to hell with Steven Crowder's opinion, and quite frankly, to hell with your opinion. Let's hear the opinion of the generals who fought for the United States and what they had to say about this concept at the time of, and eventually it happened, bombing Japan. The United States bombing Japan. This is General and former President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was in the thick of things as the Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces. This is one of the many things he had to say about the bombing of Japan. Quote, in 1945, Secretary of War Stimson, visiting my headquarters in Germany, informed me that our government was preparing to drop an atomic bomb on Japan. I had been conscious of a feeling of depression, and so I voiced to him my grave misgivings. First, on the basis of my belief that Japan was already defeated and that dropping the bomb was completely unnecessary. And secondly, because I thought that our country should avoid shocking world opinion by the use of a weapon whose employment was, I thought, no longer mandatory as a measure to save American lives. It was my belief that Japan was, at that very moment, seeking some way to surrender with a minimal loss of face, was what I was saying earlier. The secretary was deeply perturbed by my attitude. This is Richard Nixon speaking, talking about General Douglas MacArthur, a conversation they had. This is from Richard Nixon, quote, MacArthur once spoke to me very eloquently about it, talking about the bombing, pacing the floor of his apartment in the Waldorf. He thought it a tragedy that the bomb was ever exploded. MacArthur believed that the same restrictions ought to apply to atomic weapons as conventional weapons, that the military objective should always be limited damage always be limited damage to non-combatants. MacArthur, you see, was a soldier. He believed in using force only against military targets, and that is why the nuclear thing turned him off. This is Admiral William Leahy, who was certainly closer to the situation than any of us were. This is what he had to say. Quote, the use of this barbarous weapon at Hiroshima and Nagasaki was of no material assistance in our war against Japan. The Japanese were already defeated and ready to surrender because of the effective sea blockade and successful bombing with conventional weapons. Leahy continues, quote, the lethal possibilities of atomic warfare in the future are standard commons to the barbarians of the Dark Ages. I was not taught to make war in that fashion, and wars cannot be won by destroying women and children. I've got just a couple more. This is Major General Curtis LeMay. I can't talk today. I'm getting too worked up. But this is what he had to say. Bomber Command, he was certainly closer to this than we were. Quote, the war would have been over in 2 weeks without the Russians entering and without the atomic bomb. The atomic bomb had nothing to do with the end of the war at all. The war would have ended anyway. Here's Fleet Admiral William Halsey Jr., who was closer to this than all of us were. The first atomic bomb was an unnecessary experiment. It was a mistake to ever drop it. The scientists had this toy and they wanted to try it out, so they dropped it. 7 of the 8 5-star U.S. generals in 1945 opposed using the atomic bomb on Japan. Now, we could keep saying this thing till the end of time in the United States to make ourselves feel better, that, hey, we had to drop this thing because it saved American lives. But you know what? Men closer to this situation than we were, men who fought in the trenches, who wore the uniform, who were there during World War II, say it wasn't necessary, said they were about to surrender, and were horrified by all the civilians' deaths. So, Steven Crowder.
The claim they'll make is the Japanese were going to surrender anyway, so there was no need for this. Here's the truth. No, they weren't.
Ben Shapiro.
Dropping the atomic bomb on Japan was necessary for ending World War II and likely saved millions of lives.
Lots of other people on the right and elsewhere who continue to want to defend the atomic bombing of Japan. I'm going to take the opinion of the generals that were there over yours. Sorry.